So if you wanted to times or minus or divide, 2 plus 2 equals 2 plus 2, it's the same thing as what you would do with 4. Okay. So we accept fundamentally that something which is identical should be treated equally.
Yeah.
Are men and women identical?
Not necessarily.
So should they be treated equally?
Of course.
In every sense?
We're talking about human rights.
No, but hold on.
One second.
Now let me rebrand the question.
Go on.
Sorry. Should they be treated absolutely equally?
Now, when we say absolutely equally, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about particular in what sense? I'm talking about on a human rights part, and I'm talking about in general as a possibility of living as human beings.
No, I'm saying, look, because you have to understand that when we talk about logical, this is almost a logical deduction, right?
It's a false logical deduction.
You can come forward and we can talk. Let me come in. If we say, if we say that things which are identical should be treated equally.
Of course.
Let me give you an easy example, and this is something, by the way, to his credit, I refuted him last week, but this week I'm going to say something to his credit. Jordan Peterson, he mentions all the time, which is the idea of hierarchies. And I'll tell you something about it. You might not like him, but the idea is this: if you have a situation, you're going on a bus. This is my example. You're going on a bus. You see, when the red bus here, it opens its doors. You know what happens? If there's someone with a buggy or someone with a wheelchair, they put the ramp down so that they can be facilitated and go onto the thing. Now, if you look at most institutions now, it's actually it's encoded within the law that this disability access has to be available for disabled people. My question to you is, do you accept the fact that disabled peoples should have advantages over non-disabled peoples in the context of society?
This is where the argument gets really reductionist, because you then forget that disabled people have a condition that naturally shouldn't really exist, thus impairing them from living a normal life like a normal.
But that's aside the point.
No. It's actually the point.
Go on, tell me why.
We talk about human rights and we talk about equality. We talk about trying to bring about an equal amount of opportunity for everyone.
Okay, no problem.
It doesn't necessarily mean an equal
perfect
of outcome.
Yes.
But right now we are talking about an equal sense of opportunity.
Perfect.
So when we're talking about disabled people and we're talking about people with certain conditions, even now when we're talking about men and women, we need to look back historically as to why men are built the way they are.
I'm happy with that.
How environmental factors have added to the brute strength of men now and the ability to provide.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily.
I would say that there's more to do with biology with that.
Oh, there's a lot to do with evolutionary biology, because you need to go
depends
back.
on how you define it.
Well, you need to remember what we have now is a product of millions of years of evolution.
Okay.
And because of those millions of years of evolution,
so you're an evolutionist.
There's a complete separate between the men and the women, and we can see evolution. We can see evolution.
Can I ask you a question though? Herbert Spencer talked about social evolution. It's interesting because it links perfectly to the idea of hierarchies pre-existence. Whether you accept the theory of human evolution or not, if you're citing now what seems to be a Spencerian social evolution kind of rationale, I will say to you that, look, if you accept that for example, if you're a feminist or you believe in that there should be equality in the way that an absolute equality in everything that men and women do, then I could turn around and say to you, well, look at it from a Herbert Spencerian evolutionary perspective. If there is a patriarchy, then that's a natural patriarchy because it's the survival of the fitter. And who is the fitter? Now it's the man, because now he's put himself in a patriarchal position. If that's the case, then that's the natural order of things. So I would say to you, look, it depends on how you want to frame this anyways. Any epistemological way you want to root this, I'll say the same thing. If we're not exactly the same, the point is this, and this is exactly what Simone de Beauvoir, she wrote in her book in the second chapter of biology, and I always cite this because I reckon it's the point of demarcation when we talk about feminists, She acknowledges full well that there are biological differences between men and women.
Yeah, of course.
And she realizes that they're not the same, just like you do, right? But what she says is, despite the difference, there should be absolute equality. That's what she says. That's her argument. My question is, if you believe in the same thing, which seems to be that it is like that.
I've already distinguished it, so let's not put me in that same.
No, but if you believe that despite the biological, physiological, psychological, emotional differences between men and women, there should be equality at every single level. The question is why?
What divides men and women? That's the problem. Because right now,
Say that again?
what divides men and women for you? Because right now, I've basically demonstrated just how environmental factors, climate change, or whatever you want to call it, all of the natural selection pressures are to blame for the way we are right now. The way we look, the way we eat, the way we drink, even our culture.
But that's the side. That's the side of the point.
It's absolutely all enticing. All enticing. You cannot reduce the argument to just simply men and women are different. Without taking
why not?
Because you have to take into the reasons as to why they're different.
But even that's
so
not.
Even if we're talking, because this is a very important point. Because when we're talking about even now the difference between men and women, right? You need to remember the reason there's a patriarchal system is because before the working world and post-modern and post-industrial, whatever, there weren't safe working places for women. The death toll was high. You know, the work safety was not a thing. Human rights was not a thing. So for most people, it made sense for the woman who, if she falls pregnant, has 9 months of carrying a baby. So it makes no legitimate sense for her to be out there working in such dangerous conditions.
Okay.
If she's holding a child.
So
now that's a natural thing. That's a very natural thing.
Perfect.
We are now moving forward into the day and age where work safety is a lot better. Women have the opportunity to go into these workplaces, and they feel a lot safer to go into these workplaces.
Which ones? Because if you say
no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Which
What's your name again?
Which one? Rajib.
Say,
That's fair enough.
Because
we can get into the discussion about which decisions women choose, and we can get into that thing. But don't let that derail from the point that there are now places that women can work.
I don't disagree with that.
9 months pregnant,
Yeah.
and it will not, right? Disadvantage.
I'm not. My argument is not that they shouldn't work.
I understand,
Yeah.
but it should not. It's basically they can now work in a place that doesn't disadvantage the development of a child.
Okay, except
and the whole point is that it's not that we're different. We're working towards one entity, which is the child. Do you not agree?
Oh, no, I accept. I don't see that this is the question I asked you. Which I accept all the points you just said. There, I don't think I disagree with that. But here, that points you just made, I agree with it totally. No problem. Yeah. And you should have prefaced it by saying, I would say, just to be a bit more meticulous in the wording, right? In many.
You've been attacked too much.
No. In many workplace environments, women now have an enhanced safety because obviously mining is not like that. The military is not like that. You know, in different construction. Even look how many women garbage cleaners there are comparative to men. The sewage women. So here, what we have to do is that. So when we talk about the thing, this is the primary question. All right. Forget about religion now. Let's put religion to the side. All right. Let's put religion to the side. Okay. For the moment. Now I'm just going to cite the law of comparative advantage. If you're saying that what you would prefer in a society is, would you agree?
I haven't said anything.
Would you agree that what's preferred in society is those with the best particular, let's say for example, skills, are able to in a society premise of meritocracy, that they will be able to, for example, supply those particular skills to end users?
I have to disagree. This is again a very reductionist argument. It's the idea.
I said if it's premised on meritocracy.
It's the idea and the fallacy of, like, say, communism in particular, that if you have a certain group of people who are more skilled at this thing, that they should automatically go into this thing.
I think the communists would say the opposite.
Yeah. Well, they need to read. But in particular, we tend to funnel this idea that because men are better workers, then they should be all.
No, but I haven't. This is not what I've said.
I haven't said anything that you completely said that I've inferred. So
okay,
this
good.
is just inferred.
All right. Okay.
But when we're talking about, in particular, men going to certain places, you see now there's a backlash in men, right? Because they've been forced into these workplaces. They've been forced into these traditional roles, supposedly, right? And a lot of the time.
How do you define traditional?
Wait. Nowadays, providing, sheltering, whatever you want.
So it's only traditional because now you look, once again, it's anachronistic. See, look, I'm sorry, but I do feel a lot of the discussion that we're having now is rested upon this post-colonial narrative of now we're liberal, now we're feminist, now we're X, now we're Y. We look back retrospectively and everything is traditional, everything, do you see?
This is the problem, and this is what I wanted to approach you in particular, because right now, I'm not one of those guys, and this is why I said you have to separate those kind of scientific communities in particular.
Okay.
There are people, like you said, the eugenics, right? They thought that the size of your cranium basically determines the size of your brain, and it determines the size of your intellect, right? They dropped that as soon as they found out the Arabs had larger cranium sizes on average, right? So you have a certain amount of people who want science to basically flatten them, but then you have a certain amount of people who want science, history, and whatever to help better the situation that we are in. And even now, when we talk about, say, Arab societies and whatever, right? We talk about it in a patriarchal sense, right? I would not dramatize it to be that patriarchal. But right now, to be an Arab man, it is very convenient in comparison to being an Arab female. When we're talking about, in particular, let's talk about the right to marry and so on. So the reason that men have more of a polygamy entitlement or more of a polygamy claim is because women traditionally haven't had the ability to work. So the reason certain men in the past...
I don't know about that, because it depends on what kind of work we're talking about.
Again, the reason in the past certain men were able to marry more than one woman is because they could financially provide for them. It wasn't out of sexual lust, it wasn't out of...
No, but once again, we have to go to our premise. Because I've asked you this question a few times, so I would like an answer to this, right? The question always rests on the naturalistic premise. Okay, so we're saying that we both agree that men and women are not identical in their physiologies, psychologies, all their biologies, right? Now, what I'm saying to you, and I'd love to ask anyone this, in fact, not just you, if we agree with the premise that identical things should be treated equally and that men and women are not identical, there should be a therefore there. It's a deduction. Therefore, men and women should not be treated absolutely equally. So, for example, right, and this is why I think there is a fallacy in the feministic argument, because when feminists on the one hand, they argue for equal outcomes, equal opportunities for me is not that controversial. I'm not talking about equal opportunities. I agree that there should be to a greater extent than not.
Should we not concentrate on that as opposed to something that we both have said that's not really a thing?
To a greater extent, but there are exceptions to the rule. Like, for example, the situation in America, where the firefighters in America had to go through a whole they do like a physical challenge. Yeah, they do it in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. And the feminists campaigned against them. And because men are faster and stronger than women, as can be noticed by almost every sport that they partake in, with almost no controversy whatsoever. No controversy whatsoever.
I'll give you an example. You say that...
No, let me just finish. Sorry, I haven't finished the sentence. I just want to say that because of the feminists rallying the firefighting professionals and saying that we don't want this, what's happened is that they've had to... The course that they would have to do, the physical course, that would have taken, let's say, 10 minutes. They've had to add, let's say, a minute to it. Why? So that they can be more inclusive of women. Now the question is, if there is a burning building, who would you want to save you? A woman that could come 30 seconds later, or a man that will come 30 seconds earlier will save your life? I believe you, the biggest feminist in the building would want a man to come, even if it means admission that in this situation we don't want equality of opportunity or outcome. So this is just one specialized example. I'm not saying society is filled with those examples, but this is an exacerbated example of a situation where it's very clear that men have an advantage over women, and a non-recognition of this is tantamount to life and death. So this is where feminism can lead to death. Now, the point I'm making to you is, we have to look, because you're a man of science and you talk about empiricism and rationalism and these things. If we look holistically, and once again, what is the most effective and efficient thing for an economy, we have to take into consideration those factors. Once again, feminists, and this is the argument of Warren Farron, he says that they don't take into consideration the fact that men have been conscripted into the armies for maybe 10 for the whole of American history. There's been male conscription, there has never been female conscription. If we want to equalize the historical problem of patriarchal society, what we're going to need to do is conscribe women to an army for the same amount of times that we've conscribed men to the army. So if we want equality, now we have to get women drafted, forced into being in an army, drafted and forced into being in an army the same amount of times that men had been in the past. But this argument, this is why it's a fallacious argument, and it's premised on a false premise. And the premise is, despite the despite the natural differences, we should have the equality on every level. And I'm saying to you that doesn't make any sense. If we accept the premise that identical things should be treated equally, and we identify that women are not identical to men, then there must be a space, at least in some instances, where women will be treated differently to men. That's why we have maternity leave. That's why we have so many things society has put in place for women. That's why in emergencies, women and children are taken out first before men, because it's assumed men are more physically self-sufficient, and rightfully, in my opinion, assumed that men are more physically self-sufficient than women. That's why men have been drafted into the armies, and that's why women have been able to enjoy the privilege of being protected by male military men for almost all of civilization cross-culturally. So we can't have our cake and eat it both. we can't say we want equality of outcome and opportunity, but at the same time have these exceptions which feminists put in place, you see, which of course entitle them to things which are otherwise not.
Then this is what I'm trying to say. Your argument is reductionist. And when I say reductionist,
It doesn't mean it's wrong.
I understand, but I say it in the sweetest sense. Right?
Yeah.
I understand you come from a standpoint where there's a lot of colonial imperialist science that has been enforced on the Middle East as if it's the highest standard. I'm coming to say that in particular, that's not the case. We can work together, kind of thing.
Yeah,
Because I feel like there's a lot.
I agree that we can work together.
There's a lot of conservative values that the Middle East and certain Arab countries have that the West has lost. Now that would be a nice middle to come into discussing those differences, and we can meet in the middle of that. But the only problem I have to say is that when it comes to talking to Muslims in particular, that it becomes a very reductionist argument in the sense that, like you say, there's a difference between men and women. I'll ask you a simple question. Can you name me a white sprinter faster than any black
No,
female sprinter?
and that's why I say to you that I've always made the argument, I've made this on camera as well, that actually this is the fallacy of the West. Because if you look at the sprinters and, for example, black sprinters, they have consistently outperformed white sprinters for the last 100 years. Now that's the question. Because they're not equal. Do you think? Well, hold on.
This is what I'm trying to say.
Black sprinters and white sprinters are not equal.
Well, you got to be fair. You got to be fair.
They're not.
No, I understand.
Black sprinters are faster.
But we know why.
Genetically.
We know why.
It's genetics.
You can't just say genetically, though.
Yes, we can. But I think sometimes.
What is passed on in their genetics?
Let me tell you. Well, lots of things. That's why the same thing applies now when you talk about black swimmers versus white swimmers. Yeah. Right? So the thing is, you have to understand. Look at Eastern Europe. Sorry, but look at Eastern Africans.
I'm just saying, you got to be fair and you got to build a bridge with me, right?
Yeah.
You got to build a bridge.
Exactly.
You got to allow me.
But I agree with your point.
What I'm trying to say in particular is that you see where we get into a reductionist argument. The reason, in particular, there's more faster black female sprinters than there are white male sprinters, which should be a contradiction.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't think that's correct.
Can you name one?
No. The male sprinters are faster than black female swimmers.
Can you name a black swimmer? Black male swimmer.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, this point we both agree on.
So what I'm trying to say is there are certain environmental factors and certain cultural differences.
They're genetic factors.
Over time have bred certain differences.
Okay.
And that has nothing to do with man or woman or whatever.
It has everything. It has everything to do with it.
Yeah, but it has everything to do with the environment. It has everything to do with culture. It has everything to do with nurture.
Okay.
There's so much to this argument that we need to take into consideration.
No, let me tell you something.
What I'm trying to say in particular, when we talk about men and women and their equal rights, right? Yeah. We're trying to say an equal right of opportunity because we've seen that there's different factors.
What about in the firefighters?
Wait. I'll get onto that. We've seen that when given different environments and different selection pressures, human beings, whether you're man or woman, come out completely different people.
I know that.
They come out completely different. We need to remember, when we talk about all of these things, we need to take all of these things into consideration.
But do you know what you've just applied?
It's very similar. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. Yeah.
It's very similar to the whole kind of like debate that we have in America about black privilege, white privilege, or whatever, so on. So no one takes into consideration the historical benefits that white people got that black people didn't, allowing them to start their race a lot sooner than black people. Yeah. But now people complain as to why we're so behind. What I'm trying to say is people don't realize the historical effect of that. And what I'm trying to say in particular is when we come to build bridges, when I've talked to people in this park about white privilege, you will get the most polarized righty. But I can build a bridge with him, explain the history.
We're building bridges. I think we agree.
Explain the context, explain the history, and that allowed me to get on his side, understand where he's coming from, because I know exactly where they're coming from. And he's allowed to see my side and realize, you know what, there is a quantifiable reason for reparations for these people. And we haven't done enough. We've been a bit complicit and so on. So what I'm trying to say is when we're talking about, say, any kind of deliberation in Islam, that's what I want. I want that bridge where you don't feel like we're attacking.
No, for sure. I think this is fruitful. I want to say 2 things though. There's 2 things. You said that the argument is reductionist. And then you said that, there's a lot of factors that come into it. Now,
let's not get too heated about
buzzwords. No. I'm just trying to smooth out potential inconsistency. All I want to say is this. First and foremost, what you seem to have applied is genetic fallacy. Just because something has come from a certain place, it doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Of course,
So the fact that, for example, men have been advantaged, if we take that premise true, and it is true in some contexts, in many contexts.
It's not something they control.
So the fact that that is the case doesn't change the reality, the sociological reality of how to deal. That's one thing. So number 2 is just because something is reductionist, it doesn't mean it's wrong. So for example, if I say 2 + 2 = 4, that's reductionist in a sense. It's mathematically reductionist because I'm taking Or look at, for
Not
example,
necessarily, because
okay,
2 plus 2 is 4 is the highest you can go in.
yeah,
that
fine.
paragraph.
Let's say if we're looking at a fraction, if I say this, if I say
if you look at me and say my skin is black,
if I
that
say
would be a reductionist.
okay, if I say 15 out of 60
Yeah.
equals 1 out of 4, yeah. I might be wrong here, but
Don't worry. I understand.
15 out of 60 equals 1.
I'm not
All right, so here I'm reducing
Yeah.
15 out of 60 to 1 out of 4. Now, it's reductionist, but it doesn't mean it's wrong.
No, I understand that.
No, so it's a good starting point
Yes.
academically to say something is reductionist, but then you have to explain why it's wrong.
But you would never make laws. You would never do any application of anything on a reductionist argument. There
Right.
is always an
In
elaboration.
fact, the opposite is true.
Because-
Let me tell you why the opposite is true.
Go on.
Occam's razor, which is in fact is a premise, is a you could say a principle which is applied both in physics and philosophy, is exactly trying to reduce something to the lowest common particular multiple. So if I say, for example, the reason that the pyramids were built, or the reason why X is Y. The reason why X is Y. I'm not going to give an example because I know every single example I give.
No, I've got an answer
Yeah?
to this. Yeah.
That's a reductionist thing. Now, if you say the only reason,
Yeah.
that's different. If I say the main reason, so it depends on extent. Now, whatever the reason is, the point I'm making is that when it comes to men and women,